Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Last month, a young woman named Fox Varian won a medical malpractice lawsuit against doctors who convinced her to get a mastectomy so that she could, quote-unquote, live as a boy. The case is being hailed now as a landmark victory for opponents of prepubescent sex change treatments. But I also want to advise some caution here. Those same cheers we heard when Roe v. Wade was overturned, for good reason. But we didn't have a cogent plan nationally for next steps. And in this situation, we really ought to if we want to move forward in the right direction. Joining me to talk about this is Mary Kate Zander, president of Illinois Right to Life. She's also the author of this piece in First Things called A Landmark Lawsuit, but let's not cheer too soon. Mary Kate, are you with us? No. Well, as Mary Kate joins us, what I'd like to do is talk about the lawsuit proper. So, like I mentioned earlier, last month, a 22-year-old woman named Fox Varian, she won a lawsuit against her prior doctors because they coaxed her into getting, and parents, I just want to forewarn you of some of the terminology here. It was called top surgery. It's a double mastectomy. She was 16 at that point, and the doctors were pushing her so that she could, quote-unquote, live as a boy and therefore live in the way that she wanted to live. Because that was apparently the charitable thing to do, the compassionate thing to do, what have you. And this was pushed with very little assessment of her prolonged mental health and very little assessment of the prolonged effects that these procedures would have on her system. The surgery left her physically scarred, and psychologically she just registered as being deeply unhappy. It didn't solve her problems one bit. She sued her prior doctors, and she won. The lawsuit represents a major victory for opponents of precisely these kinds of interventions, prepubescent sex change treatments, especially parents, mind you, because very often the medical institutions here in the United States of America are pressuring parents into believing that if this isn't done, then effectively what is going to happen is that their children are going to do something to harm themselves and their lives. And so these narratives are pushed as if this is the charitable thing to do, this is the good parental thing to do, this is the compassionate thing to do. When really the driving force here has to do with novel medicine and most of all, money. This really is a follow-the-money situation. And so looking at Fox Varian's case, we see that this case is a landmark lawsuit. It really is the first time that any detransitioner in United States history has sued physicians for medical malpractice for precisely these prepubescent, transgender medical interventions and was successful and won. So those of us who believe that protecting the dignity of the human person extends to treating gender dysphoria as a mental illness can now feel a little validated. Because we are cheering, to be sure, this landmark case is going to create what we call a legal precedent. But Festina Lente, make haste slowly. These cheers were the very same ones we made when Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022. The cheers were loud, don't get me wrong, and rightly so. We had made a great stride in the federal courts. However, we might have cheered a little prematurely because we drowned out the voices of many people who are asking, prudentially no less, are we prepared for what comes next? Because what came next came immediately. So now states like Illinois, New York, California, they're contending with the pro-life movement's inability to answer that question, both in terms of the abortion debate at the state level and also, therefore, the transgender situation in medical interventions. So the lesson that needs to be learned here is we cannot make the same mistake twice. In the year 2024, Ohio and Missouri passed different versions of the ACLU's then supposed abortion-specific ballot referendum, but they weren't abortion-specific. The same amendment is now coming into play in Virginia. And sure, they are trying to introduce these in other states over the next few months, over the next few years. The purpose of this is to create an avenue where there's a particular kind of language, the language around things like reproductive freedom, the language around choice, the language around a mother's life and whatnot, all of these are being enshrined as constitutional rights to legalize at the federal level abortion. And these rights, they're being touted as rights, being touted as encompassing the infinite subjects. So you look at people like Mary Catherine Martin, an attorney with the Thomas More Society. She is concerned that this is potentially going to supersede even our freedoms of speech and religion, because if codified, effectively, this is going to fall into the realm of the conversation of the right to life and the dignity of life. And that's going to create a kind of precedence over and above conversations of speech and primacy of religion, primacy of conscience. One of the key groups that's inevitably going to see impact by this and going to be heavily affected by this is parents, particularly of minor children. I want to make this clear. Ever since the advent of the entire transgender medical enterprise, minor children have been targeted, and they've been targeted outright. At the end of the day, it is state, legislature, and medical institutions that feel as if, that have been set up as if they have the primary right of the good of these children who are minors. And so minor children who want to, quote-unquote, exercise their rights to reproductive freedom are being allowed constitutionally, especially if the laws are pushed forth, to go ahead with it. And in most of these cases, that's going to refer to a minor girl's decision to utilize things like birth control, even if she's procuring it from states that are not the state she resides in, and they're mailed to her, or to abort her unborn child, especially by means of chemical abortion and the mifepristone fiasco that you and I are facing today, that we continue to dialogue on this program. In many cases, however, that new right is going to be cited to, this new right in air quotes, I want to be clear here, is going to be cited to justify minor girls' double mastectomies and, unfortunately, even surgeries that completely mutilate reproductive organs without parental consent or knowledge. Make no mistake about this, my friends, that is the legal endgame here. What's startling, too, is I've covered over the past year or so on this program how Europe and most of the other nations across the world that led us, that were forerunners to us in terms of transgender medical intervention, whether by means of chemical hormonal intervention or surgical intervention, they've virtually all backpedaled their procedures. They have found that over the years of these enactments and for post-factum studies, they have found in double-blind peer-review studies that these interventions, these surgeries, don't actually help the situation, that gender dysphoria still remains a mental condition, and therefore cognitive behavioral therapy and different kinds of psychological therapy ought to be the first level of intervention, with the involvement of parents who alone desire the greatest good for children over and above the state and medical institutions and even well-meaning compassionate legislatures. So Illinois right now is laying the groundwork to introduce those amendments. Key legislatures are right now trying to speak about abortion and gender-affirming care as if they are in one breath, as if they should be stated in one breath, as if they're two sides of the same coin. J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, he has both a personal and family history when it comes to both abortion and same-sex treatments. And so Illinois is going to be one of those states that moves down this path. And not only has Pritzker implemented numerous laws and policies during his time as governor that are funding, by means of federal funding no less, funding, advancing, and protecting abortion and sex change treatments, he's got relatives that are some of the most high-profile individuals that are spokespersons for these things. And so the narrative now is being pushed in a further way to impact children, and willfully so. Sure, the program that's being launched by Illinois right now has treatments on hold because they are awaiting deliberation on things like executive orders, especially by the Trump administration. And yes, therefore, we can be grateful of some of the executive orders that are creating stays of execution for this issue. But Congress is not taking matters into their own hands. And so we are going to see that this fight is going to be at the level of the state, unless we as a nation not only make abortion unthinkable, but make sex change treatments, medical interventions, surgical interventions for the entire transgender situation unthinkable. Until such a time, this fight has to continue, and let's be informed so that we can make our voices heard. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.